Hi, this is Walter from Yellowstone Country Fly Fishing, and this is my Montana Guide Flies fly tying video for March 12th, 2025. What I'm doing today is a bead, hare, and copper, and this is by Matt Minch, who died in 2023. Very underappreciated commercial fly tyer from sometime in the 1970s until basically his death. And he came up with a lot of simple flies like this that worked really well in the Yellowstone region and beyond. I actually caught a steelhead on this pattern, and he once caught two 9-pound browns back to back in New Zealand on this pattern. So this is his version of the bead, hare, and copper. You're going to see other flies called this. You can modify this pattern in a whole bunch of different ways. And, particularly in changing the body color and especially the head color. I'll usually tie this with the tan hare's ear body, but I'll often change the head to a darker dubbing or to peacock curl or something like that to suggest caddis pupae. But in this size, which is size 12, this pattern is essentially a small junk bug. He thought it actually looked a little bit like an egg, and you can tie it with an orange bead to really push the egg motif. And this is kind of a follow-on to the pattern I did the other day, which is the particular girdle bug or patched rubber legs that I tend to use this time of year. And this is often the fly that I'll have behind that on my dropper. And size 12, and still a good size gob of protein, but just a little bit smaller. And it's amazing how many large fish I've had on this pattern. It probably doesn't work in the Yellowstone region as well as it used to, but for a long time, and I'm talking from, when I started guiding in 2001 until 2017, 2018, this pattern right here was actually our best big fish fly. You probably didn't catch your absolute largest fish on it, but you caught more of your kind of 15 to 18 inch browns in the fall and then rainbows in the spring, pre-spawn in both cases on this pattern. You were always fishing it with something bigger. Here's my girdle bug I tied the other day. You were always fishing it behind something like that, or a big black stone or something else, something else that really caught the fish's attention. But this was your second chance fly. The fish would look at the big fly, move towards it, but not take it, and then they'd eat this. And we fish a lot of those kind of second chance flies in about a size 12 or 14 and catch a lot of bigger fish on them. And like I said, it's obviously a hare's ear variation. In fact, this is the pattern I use instead of a hare's ear. I haven't used a hare's ear in 20 years. This is more caddis-like, and we have more caddis around here. And then when we do have mayflies, they're usually smaller and darker, and so I tend to fish pheasant tail type patterns. But I'll tie this on a scud hook. I'll tie it on a standard nymph hook, which was the original version. Here it's on a jig hook, and for this larger reason, this larger pattern, size 12, I don't think there's any reason not to tie it on a jig hook. But you tie it in a size 16 with a peacock curl or a brown head or thorax here. Boom, that's a money caddis imitation. I fish those all the time these days as caddis pupae in July. And then, like I said, it's fallen off a little bit in the spring and fall. It's not quite as effective as it used to be. It used to be the #1 fly, but it's probably still in the top fly. It's in the top 5, maybe even the top 3 as your kind of dropper behind whatever bigger thing you're fishing. So if you're going out in the near future on the Yellowstone or even the Madison, even the East, not the East Madison, the East Gallatin, this is a good pattern to use right now. So mid-March to early April, and then again in the fall, in this size 12 or 14 kind of size range. Okay, so my hook in the vise here is a size 12 Montana Fly Company barbed jig hook, and you can use a 1XL standard nymph hook if you like. You could use a more common jig nymph hook where it doesn't have the barb on it. I just like having the barb because that way I can rig a dropper off the bend of the hook and it doesn't slide off. I've already smashed the barb here. And then in the small sizes, the 16s in particular, I tie these up mostly on scud hooks. And then the bead is going to be a 1/8 inch copper slotted tungsten, and then originally it would have been a brass copper bead, copper brass bead. size those up or down depending on your hook size. Matt would tie these in sizes 10 through 16, and I tend to tie them in 12 and 16 the most. And then you can alter your bead if you like, particularly in the spring and fall. Going kind of egg style is really popular. These, you can't really see it here, but this is kind of an orange bead with sort of a pearl pink core. These were really, really effective for a few seasons up in Yellowstone Park for the fall run browns. Unfortunately, good luck finding these. There's your label here. These were a Joanne Craft and Fabric bead, and Joanne Craft and Fabric no longer exists. So if you've got a Joanne Craft and Fabric that's going out of business near you, run in and buy some of these if you like to tie these. That would give it kind of a pink squirrel sort of feel. I understand that's a popular nymph back east, or in the Midwest, I should say. And my thread here is going to be, again, 6/0 light brown. It's the third time in a row I've used this thread, and that's one of the reasons I'm doing this pattern. So I'm going to start that at the front and then just wrap all the way to the almost to the bend here. These jig hooks, they kind of bend early. And then my tail and legs on this fly are going to be a brown partridge flank feather, or I guess it's a partridge back feather. And I really do like the brown on this rather than the gray. These were commercially available for a while from Montana Fly Company, but they've since dropped them. And they tended to use the gray ones. But Matt really liked the brown, and I really like the brown. So if you actually look at a partridge skin here, I'm zoomed in a little close, but you can see here where I'm pulling those off. The female partridge, the Hungarian partridge, would actually have more of these feathers, but the males have some too. So that's kind of off the back of the bird, kind of towards the tail here. And what I'm going to do here is actually take that feather, and first I'm going to strip off the fluff, because I don't need that. I'm actually going to take that feather and then divide it like so. You see how I'm pulling down those kind of base fibers there and leaving the tip. Now the tip is going to be the tail of this pattern, and then the rest of the feather is going to be the legs. And so this is it's actually a 3 material fly. So I'm going to tie that in, and I like that kind of short. Matt also liked it kind of short. Half to 2/3 kind of shank length there. And then my rib on this fly is going to be, well, I got my here it is. Large copper uni wire, and you can see there, that's very thick wire. And that's one of the hallmarks of this pattern. As I think I said, this is a bead, hair, and copper. And the copper is just as important as the bead and the hair on this pattern. And so you can see how thick that wire is. I'm going to tie that in. And I usually like to tie that in, extending about 3/4 of the way, 2/3 of the way up the hook shank. You tie the body in 2 stages on this fly, and so I like to kind of have that tie-in covering the abdomen, but not the head. Okay, and then the body on the pattern here is going to be hairline dubbing in the original hare's ear. You could use dark hare's ear if you like. Back when I used to work in Gardner, the fly shop stocked the pattern in olive and cream as well. He really liked the cream actually on the Spring Creeks, if you believe it. And but again, you can tie this in any color you like. You can also switch out the dubbings. I will often tie this with dark hare's ear in the Arizona synthetic peacock, just because it has a little bit more flash to it. You can also tie it with a little bit of ice dub in the body mix if you like, but it kind of, your basic sort of tan dubbing here. And I'm going to single strand dub that, and don't get too particular about, dubbing it up too tight. You want this fly to be rough. In fact, if it comes out too tight, you might want to actually go over it with a brush towards the end, just to roughen it up a little bit. Like I said, this thing kind of looks more caddis-like than a mayfly, and that's basically why we liked it, and why I still like it. You can kind of see how rough that body's going to come out, and give it a slight taper back to front, and just sort of a rough and ready sort of dub here. You don't want that to be too snazzy. Matt would sometimes catch fish on the Missouri River on this pattern as well, and certainly it was imitating a scud in that circumstance. So I've ended about, roughly a bead length behind the bead, and you can kind of fiddle with that a little bit, because once I wrap the wire for it and tie it off, you can always cover up some of the dubbing with thread. But the rib on this fly is pretty thick. You can see I'm wrapping that rib pretty close to itself. The peacock-headed version, Matt actually called a copper mat, and you can kind of based on the copper John, and he would actually do about 8 turns of this wire, this really heavy wire, even on a fly this size. And so you can imagine how much wire that would actually be on the body of the fly. So it's you know, it's got a lot of that tan dubbing, but that wire is going to be more prominent than you'll see it on most nymph patterns of this size. Okay, so I've tied that off and helicoptered it, and then I've got the remainder of that partridge feather. And so on a standard nymph, if this was a standard nymph hook, I would just tie it in like this. But since it's the nymph hook, and hopefully the fly is going to ride upside down at least most of the time, I'm going to invert that and tie it in like this, and so it kind of is going to be angled downward on the fly. So I take that via feathers or feather fibers and put, you know, one side on one side of the fly, one side of the other, extending most of the way back to the base of the tail. I'm going to tie that in. And what I like to do is reverse that stem. So I'm going to grab that stem and kind of fold it back and tie that off. And then I cut it. And that's going to prevent that, you know, these fibers from pulling out. Let's say I grab those with my forceps after I caught a nice fish and I pull on it, that's still not going to pull out. And you can see some of those fibers kind of spread around the hook shank. So what? This is a rough and ready fly. You don't have to be too particular with it. Now I'm going to get a little bit more of that same dubbing. And like I said, nowadays when I'm trying to imitate caddis, I usually use either brown dubbing or peacock herl for the head on this fly. But the OG was like this with just more of the same dubbing. And I like to make that head a little rougher and a little fatter. Matt usually tied it about the same diameter as the body. Then wrap up right to that bead, and then get my thread here, and whip finish. And that's all you have to do. It's a long video for a simple fly, but it's a really good one, and I really wanted to emphasize that you know, you're not going to see a pattern like this very often anymore, and the fish also don't see the pattern like this very often anymore. You're going to see, you know, those let's say Guide's Choice hares here, which is basically what I've just described, a peacock head on this fly. You see that one a lot more than you see something this sort of aggressively generic. And sometimes that aggressively generic is a good thing because the fish have less reason to say no to it, if that makes sense. But there you have it. That's a bead hare and copper, Matt Minch special pattern, known for producing large brown trout in New Zealand and a lot of big rainbows in the spring on the Yellowstone as well. And suggest tying these up, fiddle with them. You know, if you're in the drift list, tie some purple or some pink fur on that, and then you have a pink squirrel. You know, tie it in whatever color you like. Olive can work well. But as always, thanks for watching. And if you find this pattern or this video or my other content helpful, I'd appreciate it if you click the Buy Me a Coffee link in the pattern description and throw me a buck or two. And as always, thanks for watching. See you next time.